Hello and good morning. I'm Ernesto Burton, publisher of New Hampshire Business Review, and I'm pleased to welcome you today to our webinar, Strategies for Clean Air, Clean Spaces, as employees return to offices. Obviously a topic that's near and dear to everyone's heart in this very strange year. We're grateful to our sponsors today, RPF Environmental, Granite State Plumbing and Heating, and So Clean. And we're grateful to have some really knowledgeable speakers across a variety of disciplines joining us today. And I'll take a moment and introduce them. We really couldn't have a better mix of people to help cover the challenges that employers face as they bring people back to their offices during this time of pandemic. Dennis Francoeur is the principal at RPF Environmental. He's been employed with RPF Environmental since 1997 and is the technical director responsible for technical review of projects and operating procedures for staff. He specializes in industrial hygiene, OSHA compliance, site safety, and health management and remediation HASP development. John Hobden is Vice President at Granite State Plumbing and Heating. He joined Granite State Plumbing and Heating in 2018 and brings an engineering, manufacturing, and construction background to help lead Granite State as they strive to maintain their reputation as the premier mechanical contractor in New Hampshire. Scott Tarzia is the Industrial Sales and Business Development Head at Granite State Plumbing and Heating. He joined Granite State in 2014, where he's implemented his sales technique and helped grow the service small projects division after running mechanical and plumbing crews in Massachusetts and New Hampshire. Bob Wilkins is the CEO of So Clean. He's an executive entrepreneur with a passion for people and emerging technology. He's been a board member of So Clean since its inception, and in late 2017, he led So Clean to a successful purchase by DWHP and continues to drive the company's rapid global expansion. And it's worth noting that just recently, Bob was named 2020 Entrepreneur of the Year by the New Hampshire Tech Alliance. So congratulations, Bob.
Thank you.
All right, and those are the introductions. We are going to jump right in. This is a big discussion. We're looking at what employers can help do to ensure their office air and office space overall is as healthy as possible for employees to return. And to start that off, I think that a question, maybe a good place to begin is the question of testing. What kinds of things should people be testing for? How often should they be testing? And what are some of the standards by which they're testing? And maybe, Dennis, since that is most directly in your wheelhouse, we can start with you. What are you seeing out there in terms of testing, both in terms of frequency and the type of standards that people are applying?
Sure. Up till recently, there hadn't been reliable testing methods and laboratories for air sampling or surface sampling. That's developed in the last month or so. We've got several labs that now offer the analytical capabilities so that we actually can now go test for COVID in air and on surfaces. We've had 4 or 5 projects where we've tested. The tough part with testing for COVID is if you don't have a patient that is actively releasing COVID into the environment, it's going to be gone within 2 to 3 days. So if we don't have an active patient or someone that was just in a building and you say, all right, yeah, we've come in and we've cleaned, we want to test, and it's a week later, there's no reason to test for COVID at that point because it's either gone or it's dead. They're saying it'll last in air up to 2 days, maybe 3 days. But it typically falls off and is going to die within 2-3 days on most surfaces, and on some surfaces it's dead within 3 to 4 hours. So one of the difficulties with testing on surfaces is most of the methods use something called PCR, polymerase chain reaction, and you might do a swab and come back with a positive, but we don't know whether it's a dead COVID or a live COVID because it's just coming back looking at the genetic material that's in the virus. So it could be dead because it was deposited a week or 2 earlier, but you might get false positives. One of the things that we've done, we've had several clients come out and say, hey, we're going to buy XYZ air cleaning system, and we want to verify that it works. The manufacturers are saying, well, you need to test for viable bacteria, viable meaning living, and viable fungi. And if it's a UV unit or a hydrogen peroxide unit, you can test for the viable bacteria and fungi, and you should see a reduction. Emily, could you throw up my first slide, please? So this was a client with 6 sites, and they did 6 different manufacturers. It was a dry hydrogen peroxide, a bipolar ionization machine, a gaseous hydrogen peroxide system, bipolar ionization, and then UV light units. So they basically set up these units, and 2 days before they turned them on, we sampled on 2 different days, 6 locations per facility. And the facilities are all very similar in size and nature and what they do. And then they turned the units on and let them run for a week. And then we went back and did another round of tests. And you can see the yellow boxes where we actually got a pretty significant reduction. Limited number of samples, and loading is variable. It was a retail facility. They could not control the number of customers that were in there. So there is some variability in that, but you can see with the yellow boxes that some of the technology gave them some significant reductions in the airborne living bacteria and living fungi. That being said, the manufacturers are saying, well, if you're killing off the fungi and the bacteria, then you're going to be killing off the COVID virus. So that's one thing that's gone on. We've had 2 other projects since this was done with hydrogen peroxide systems. We haven't had a lot of luck. We've had areas that go up after the system's installed and turned on, and we've had areas go down. And again, that could be occupant loading issues and whether or not they're bringing in more or less bacteria and fungi. We have the next slide, please, Emily. This slide is for adenosine triphosphate. It's used as a test agent for cleanliness. The hospitals use it, food processing units, and some of you may have remembered we had some pharmaceutical issues in Massachusetts where some injectable medicines were contaminated. This is a kind of a test that you swab the surface, and within 15 seconds, I can give you a relative luminescence. It's telling me in relative terms how much RNA is present, RNA coming from living cells or even dead cells. So from a hospital standpoint, they'll swab beds underneath the handles, doorknobs, sinks, toilets, and they can evaluate cleanliness of their facilities. So this is the same operation with the bacteria testing. And we went in and we did pre-tests, we did post-tests, and pretty much all of the systems had a little bit of an effect. The column on the right is the relative response after the installation, and we compared the post results to the average of the beginning ones. And with the gaseous hydrogen peroxide, we actually got up to an 80% reduction. So ATP has been out there for quite a while. It does not test for COVID because the virus does not have RNA per se, so it doesn't pick it up, but it's a cleanliness thing. So if you've got a protocol in place for routine daily cleaning, you can go out and evaluate how well they're doing and make modifications to your plan if and when you see that you're not getting cleanliness standards. And the manufacturer of this, Hygiena, does have some recommended limits that they have for the food industry and the hospital industry that you can compare your numbers to. Relatively inexpensive, and again, we get results in about 15 minutes.
Now, Dennis, and actually I'd throw this question out to the whole panel. Looking at this chart and thinking about the last one as well, what are the takeaways that you draw from that? Are there recommendations that you would make to people based on those numbers?
Don't believe all the gobbledygook from the salespeople. This could be, we're not seeing the positive results that the manufacturers claim because the systems aren't operating properly or they're too far away. The whole ventilation thing, which will come up later, is very difficult. This morning at 4:30, as I was getting ready for work, they actually had a piece on the news talking about a study in Korea where a bunch of people came down with COVID. They did the research and found out that they had a patient with COVID on this side of the room, and then people over here caught the disease. And what they found out is the air was blowing from the patient with the disease, and it was blowing the virus load in the droplets from his breath. It was blowing that virus load downstream to the next table and the table after that, and those people got infected. If you believe the epidemiology work, that was their only source of exposure, is sitting literally downwind from an infected patient. So it's a matter of really looking at the systems and how they work. There's new stuff out there with ionization units, which puts up air curtains between people. The use of HEPA filters, is pretty good technology because it removes 99.97% of the materials that are in the air, which would include the droplets, which would contain the virus.
So, so thinking about these are some of the test results, but to sort of put those into context, maybe it would be helpful to move on to standards and talk about what the actual standards are. And I know Scott and John, you guys have some slides about the MERV ratings. Would those be applicable here?
Absolutely. And if you could put up slide number 2, I think that's probably the best place to start. I think a lot of people these days are hearing reports about or recommendations from the CDC about MERV filtration levels. And so it comes up a lot, and most people don't know what MERV stands for, so we thought we'd start by explaining what that means. MERV stands for the minimum efficiency reporting value. It's defined by ANSI and ASHRAE. Essentially what they've done is they take filters, they run them through a test. They run 6 cycles on the test and measure a particle load before the filter, downstream of the filter, and determine the average efficiency of that filtration level. A lot of engineering data in there, a lot of numbers, a lot of percentages, not necessarily applicable for most people. And if you want to go to slide 3, this really kind of sums it up, I think, nicely. Most of your office equipment typically comes the MERV 8 filter. The MERV 8 is good for dust mites, mold spores, things in that sort. CDC recommends MERV 13, which is efficient at removing particle sizes down to bacteria and virus carriers, which is why the CDC recommends going with MERV 13 where you can. The difficulty comes in the operation of the system itself. As I mentioned, most systems operate with either a MERV 8 or MERV 11. That's what they're designed for. As you can imagine, if you try and breathe through multiple masks, which most people are familiar with today, the more layers you put on there, the more difficult it is for you to breathe. The same goes for your HVAC system. The higher the MERV rating on the filter, the more difficult it is to move the air through there. So simply putting in a higher MERV level will capture some of the virus, but you're reducing the amount of airflow throughout the system, which can be actually worse for you and your employees than running more air with a lesser MERV filtration level.
How does that work? How does it, if the airflow is reduced, how does it make it worse, from a health outcome?
So from an HVAC standpoint, your units are going to bring outdoor air in and bring that into the system, which is a percentage of the air. So the less air that's moving through that, the less outdoor air that you have, the less air changes you have in the space. So the air becomes more stagnant and stale. So rather than, as Dennis mentioned, rather than blowing the virus across the room, it tends to stay stagnant in the space and be present for more people to inhale and be affected by it.
Okay. So what are you seeing in terms of how are people, I guess, adapting to that catch-22? That the rating that's being most recommended is also one that could cause its own kind of health problems.
Right. So what we see, a lot of people calling us, asking us to come out, change filters, and what we recommend doing is actually doing an evaluation of the system to determine if the system can handle the higher static pressure that a filter would a higher MERV rating filter would result in. And if the system can't handle it, then we have to look at alternate options. So the first option you look at is replacing the system, but that's costly and timely. But there are other technologies that exist that we can add to the systems to help change the structure of the viruses to be captured by the lower level filters. And I think that's a good time for Scott to jump in because he's most familiar with that technology.
Yeah, like John was saying, you know, a lot of people are jumping on the filter train. The filter train is a difficult one to get on right now because you can't get them. Availability on air filters is 14 to 18 weeks out right now. And the ionizers come into play with the fact that they put so many different positive and negative ions in the air. And when you do that, they're starting to weigh down all the dust particles, all the virus cells, bacteria, fungus, and it allows your MERV 8 filter to almost act as an 11 or a 12 because it's making all of your particles 4 to 5 times larger so that MERV 8 starts to catch them. While the ions are attached to any bacteria or virus cells, they're extracting the hydrogen that's inside of any bacteria or fungus cells. Once it does that, it renders that cell dead. At that point, it really can't do anything to a human anymore. It's dead. That hydrogen is the virus's food source. And once that's removed, it really can't do anything to you. So the filters will then capture it, or it weighs it down to the floor where, as it's being killed, it's not going to do anything to anybody anymore. The thing that we've seen is that if the ionizers and or UV, a lot of people are using UV as well, if they're sized properly and the units are in proper operation and the airflow is moving as it should, they are extremely effective. In Dennis's slide, you saw one of the yellow boxes was one of the ionizers where it had a significant reduction. I've seen a lot of the test results from this, and it's a viable item right now. It's a readily available item right now. We had an issue getting them a while back, but the manufacturer has really stepped up and you know, produced a lot of them so that, you know, almost anybody can get a hold of these right now.
So talking about that kind of technology, I think maybe it's appropriate to move over to Bob. And you guys are making those technology elements. Can you say a little bit about what your clients are doing with the pieces that you're making and what those pieces of technology are?
Well, I love this conversation because as an owner of a business and employees in it, you know, we're dealing with what these guys are talking about. What do we do with our major systems? How do we move air better? What do we do to capture? And again, can we afford the retrofit and everything else that needs to come up with this? We took a little different approach with this because of all the issues they brought up, which is how do I kind of create a personal space? So we separated people out, and then where those empty desks were, we've put in what we call a personal air filter system that's right next to them. So creating that cone that Dennis was talking about of air around you. The product we came out with, our So Clean Air, is the only one that actually has clean room air qualities. It's 99.99999. Goes down to 10 nanometers, but it's not designed for, you know, the big room. But I think that's the question. If somebody's coming through the room and you've got an air filter, a personal air filter over there, that might circulate the air for a couple hours or in the 10-hour period, but how do you stop that person who might have COVID, that breath getting near you? What do you do? And so having a personal air filter closer to you kind of creates that cone and is also capturing what might have come around you. I just flew recently, and I did all the CDC lookup of what should I do on the plane. And it was interesting. One of the things they wanted you to do is actually turn on the air nozzle above you, point it close to you to push air away from you from anybody that might be around you, because that's the good air. The bad air is dropping down. So it's kind of the same principle. So we're doing that. And then the second piece is to the surface piece. We ran into, I think what everybody ran into early on is how do I get a hold of disinfecting wipes or the products? So we came out with a device that recharges microfiber towels and makes them disinfecting wipes. So you can stick it in there. We put ozone into, you wet it down, and we create aqueous ozone in the towel in about 5 minutes, and you can use that for 15 to 20 minutes on any surface and clean it. And the nice thing is there's no chemicals and it doesn't leave anything behind, and you're not throwing things away into the trash. So we've kind of taken more the personal side of this thing, and still knowing as a business we need to take the industrial side too and install these things when we can get our hands on them.
So on your personal air filters, how are they filtering the air? Like, what's the technology that they're using to remove the virus from the air in that cone around you?
Yeah, so it's a 3-stage filter. There's a carbon stage to it. It takes the first piece of it, and then there's actually a mechanical filter that is able to capture the down to a 10 nanometer space, and then still move the air out. And to the points earlier Scott and John were talking about, the more the higher up you get on your filter, it's harder to push air through. We're still able to do that through mechanical filter and make the capture. And again, it's better than HEPA filter, about 3,000 times better than HEPA filter capture.
And then you mentioned on the charging of the cloth for cleaning surfaces, something called aqueous ozone. And if our audience might be more knowledgeable than I am, but I didn't know what that was. So maybe you can give a little explanation of what aqueous ozone is. And in general, I think we have maybe a concept of ozone that dates back to the 80s or 90s when it was a slightly different idea than what people are doing now.
Yeah, so first of all, ozone is created naturally in a lightning strike, and so if you smell the air after a rainstorm and a lightning strike, that's the smell you're getting from ozone that's created. And so it's a natural killer, and it kills viruses, bacteria, and so on. It's been used in hospitals and municipalities and food product all the time. In fact, you can take a aqueous ozone rag and wipe down an apple and eat it. So what we've been doing with the CPAP cleaning is using gas and running the gas through the CPAP machine, the tube of the mask, to get our bacteria and virus kill rate. So that's a gas which you don't want to breathe in. So then we put it back through a carbon filter and it turns back to O2. With aqueous ozone, what we're doing is we're taking the ozone created from a corona discharge, we're embedding that into a water molecule in a cloth. And so you take the cloth, cold water, get it damp, not wringy wet, you stick it in the machine, and 5 minutes later out comes all the water that was in that microfiber towel is now aqueous ozone. So now you can put it on the surface and you can use that to spread it around to clean. I started playing with it in the house, and my wife said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm cleaning the kitchen." And she goes, "What?" I said, "Look at this, it's streak free, it's the perfect thing." And she couldn't believe it. And it's not only just a great cleaning thing, you're killing things at the same time. So it's a great way to use technology and move this around. I don't think we would have thought of it was it for COVID, but we had to do something because you get to a point where the chemicals are too high and you're smelling them, and you've got too strong of an agent on there versus you can't get a hold of the wipes, and this just seems to be the perfect solution to that.
Yeah, and I think, Dennis, you had mentioned when we were talking before the call that, from a testing perspective, often when people are talking about cleaning surfaces, with all of the agents that are out there to clean surfaces, that there's not always a good understanding of how clean those are getting the surfaces, or really whether or not they're being used correctly. Is that right?
Correct. The ATP technology has been used in the medical field for cleaning evaluations. There are no standards for for COVID. One of the things that we've had a lot of clients do is when people talk about air exchanges and air cleanliness is, again, a surrogate is for carbon dioxide. There are standards and recommendations for CO2 in air. I mean, as I'm sitting here, I'm breathing out CO2. And if my ventilation system isn't operating properly, then the CO2, which is outside around 410, 412 parts per million, We'll go up. I've seen, classrooms with 20 kids. It goes up to 2,500 parts per million. So that was an indicator we could go through. We've been through a lot of schools to make sure that they are getting the air introduction, they are exchanging the air, and then along with that, we can either test for ultrafine particulates or PM10 dust, and again, look at a comparison. And if the filtration systems are working, the numbers will be fine. If they're not, we see elevated particulates in the air, then we can go back, look at the ventilation system. Maybe it's turning off when it's not supposed to. A lot of these systems now in schools are computerized for basically electricity management. And I remember being in a school in southern New Hampshire, and I walked in, as soon as I walked into the library, I says, the ventilation system's off. He goes, well, how do you know that? I said, my CO2 went through the roof and my ultrafine particulates went through the roof. He goes, hold on. And he runs down the hall, he gets to his office, fires up his computer, and lo and behold, they had a lightning strike over the weekend, shut down the computer system, and it shut down the ventilation system for the school. So the kiddies were being exposed to CO2, which by itself isn't going to be bad, but it's an indicator or a surrogate that there's other bad things, bioeffluents, body odor, dandruff, skin cells, routine. So we can use those as general indicators of air quality and performance of the ventilation systems, and then get the HVAC guys in to be able to fix it.
So before we totally move off of the surfaces, we did have a video, didn't we, from SoClean? Maybe Emily, if you could bring that up real quick so we could get a sense of the piece of technology that Bob was just talking about.
Yeah, so here she's just literally wetting the cloth down in cold water, and then putting it into we call it device disinfector, and then she's gonna hit a button, and 5 minutes later, there's different cycles, but 5 minutes is all you need, and you bring it out, and you've got a disinfecting cloth that you can use on all your surfaces, and there's no film or residue left behind. You really can't smell it. If you put your nose down to the granite or to the surface you did, you'll smell it then. You'll smell it on the cloth, but what's nice about it is you're not smelling it standing there. So, we've all sprayed 409 or other chemicals around, and great, we know it's working, but we also we brought it into us by smelling it. So this is a really nice technology. It works great. The kill rate's fantastic on it. What we love about it, it's reusable, it's rechargeable. You don't have to throw anything away afterwards.
Wow, that's very cool. Is that kind of technology also in use in filters that might be going into air systems? Maybe Scott or John?
So there's some different technologies that you can put into the airstream to do that. Scott mentioned ionization previously. It does the same thing. It's putting those positive, negative ions out there, Scott said, that then attach themselves to other particles. They group together, allows the filter to take it out. The other technology that exists, and Scott touched on that as well, is UV lights. You put UV lights in the duct system, and the UV rays penetrate, kill the viruses. So it sterilizes the air as it passes through. So you're not relying on the filtration system to remove them, because the UV light's actually killing everything in its path. Those are they're nice, but they are somewhat difficult. You have to have the proper dwell time, intensity, the airflow. A lot of factors go into sizing those properly. You have to maintain them. Obviously, they are light bulbs. They burn out. They do need to be replaced. But they do a great job of killing things in the airstream. But we are seeing a better result with lower maintenance coming out of the ionization technology that exists.
Okay, and just for the audience, if you have any questions, please do type them into the questions field in the webinar interface. We'd love to hear from you, and we are certainly open to questions for the whole time. Another one that I wanted to touch on as a group is, you just mentioned 3 technologies: ionization, UV lights, and filters were I think the first one. Of those 3, what are some of the pluses and minuses? If I'm trying to figure out what to do with my building, where do I start?
The best place to start is with your filter. The systems exist, already have filters in them. Regularly changing your filters helps, remove particles, helps the system breathe better. And then as I mentioned before, you can look into increasing your filtration level to see what the max that your system can handle is. The higher up you go to a point is beneficial until you start reducing airflow. We can look at outdoor air going into the system as well. It's kind of another little sub element to the whole process. From there, from a cost and timeliness factor, the ionization we're seeing is a better fit than UV. The equipment's readily available. The installation takes a minimal amount of time. Scott, it takes about a couple hours. Is that correct?
Yeah, the iWave C, which is the larger unit, takes about 1 to 2 hours, depending on the application. Yep, it has no maintenance. You don't have to touch it. Once it's in, it's in. It's also got an added feature to it for a controls point. So if you want to add the wire to your DDC system, it'll tell you if the unit has failed. So you don't have to actually go out to the unit to see if it's working. You can look at it on the front end of your system while you're doing your daily checks on all your HVAC equipment. That's kind of a handy little thing to have a point added to it. And yeah, I mean, UV is a great type of system, but it really requires a lot of maintenance. Once you turn on a UV bulb, it starts to degenerate. So the longer period that bulb runs, the less effective it becomes. With the ionizer, it runs 24/7, whether you have airflow or not, and it just keeps building up into the system, killing and cleaning the ductwork and just dropping all of their positive and negative ions throughout the building, causing less static electricity as well. So they're a really neat system. We've been putting them in for a while. Haven't had any issues with them. People seem to like them, like the fact that they don't have to touch them. And like we saw with Dennis's testing, it does show results.
Now, presumably those don't replace a filter system, they're in addition.
Correct.
But they're not filtering out dust and dander and pollen and stuff like that.
Right, yeah, they augment.
Go ahead, John. They're attaching themselves to all the particles that they can come in contact with, whether it's pollen, a virus cell, a bacteria, VOCs, and it's weighing them down, allowing the filters that you currently have in your system to capture and hold them.
Do they make, so do they make the existing filter system more effective, even if it's, regardless of which MERV rating it's at?
Yes,
Correct.
they do.
So with the units that we've been using, they're an addition. They're another tool in the fight against the coronavirus, the common cold, strep, MRSA. It's a neat little tool, and that's what I try to tell people. It's another tool to help combat what's currently happening.
It's worth noting that this technology is used in hospitals and ORs to ensure that the air is clean in those environments. It's been around for a long time. There is some history to it where old units generated high levels of ozone in the air, which was detrimental. The new units, the new technology does not do that. It is perfectly safe. As I said, it's used in ORs to make sure that environment is clean and sterile for the patients and the doctors.
Yeah. Now you had mentioned that there are things that are hard to come by right now from a supply standpoint. Are those ionization units hard to come by, or are they available?
They're readily available. Right now, I can get my hands on almost an endless number right now. They take about 2 days to arrive at our office, and we distribute them on a first-come, first-served basis. And so far, like I said, we had a little hiccup in the beginning because everybody demanded something right away, and then it calmed down. And now that numbers are starting to come back up, people are starting to reach out and have more interest in the units. And I had checked stock levels the other day with a couple of different vendors, and they all seem to be ready to go.
Okay. Well, I want to change gears a little bit here. We've got a number of questions coming in from the audience, and so I want to make sure that we get to some of those. First one is, and I suspect that this might be one that Bob, you might want to tackle. If a restaurant can't make permanent changes until a later date, would putting in some number of portable filter units, such as home size units, to get by until they could do permanent upgrade or replacement changes, I think be worthwhile, is the question.
Yeah, absolutely. We have actually quite a few restaurants that have bought the So Clean Air, and they're actually sticking them on the tables that are empty. And so it works well. It's also a comfort to anybody who's going in the restaurant, knowing that they can visually see that the restaurant owner is doing something to move the air around to capture things and go about that. We've got inquiries from cruise ships right now for small rooms. I mean, imagine trying to redo a cruise ship air duct at this point. I can't even imagine how they're going to pull that off. So having a personal air filter system in there or a device disinfector, make sure you can wipe things down. We're seeing that type of inquiries. Anything in a small space, it works very well.
Are there other things that you guys, Dennis or Scott or John, are seeing restaurant clients doing short of replacing the whole system or making big permanent changes?
I have not.
No.
I've
been seeing a lot of chemicals. Restaurant owners, they're aware of what the chemicals are capable of doing. I was just at a restaurant earlier this week, and I observed one of the waitresses spray down the tables, let it sit for about 2 minutes, and then she started to, wipe the tables down. And a lot of people are under the impression that these chemicals kill on contact. They really don't. It does take time. Even if you look at like the Clorox wipes, 99.9% effective. They are. If you read what the container says, you have to continually wipe that surface for, if I'm not mistaken, it's 60 to 90 seconds. Virus cells are made out of a protein. And in order for that wipe to break that barrier on the outside of a virus cell, it has to break through that protein. And then the chemical can then kill it. And it takes a little bit of time. It's not just spray and wipe. I haven't seen a whole lot of restaurants doing a lot with their ventilation systems yet, and I think they were just kind of waiting to see where this was going to go. But now that they're seeing numbers starting to rise again, I think you're going to start seeing an uptick in, people inquiring about filters, ionization, UV, and other items.
Okay, excellent. And so another question. Oh, what do we have there?
This is scrubbing bubbles 99.9, but it has to sit wet for at least 60 seconds.
Yeah.
So I guess if you apply it in a high wind, that's the specification would not be met. Okay, so we have a question here. Would any of these units be recommended in a healthcare setting, for example, a dental office? And I suspect they might be talking about the units that you guys are making, but I think that's a broader question too. What's everybody seeing in healthcare? Is it a let's take a dentist's office. What are you guys seeing?
Again, I think Bob's equipment, makes sense in some regard. The So Clean product makes sense for surfaces for sure. But with a dentist office or other medical facilities, the ionization technology that we're seeing with the filtration levels makes sense. It blankets the entire space to make sure that entire space is clean. And then you can apply localized solutions in your higher risk areas as well.
I've done ionization in 4 dentist offices around the state at this point. I've done several hospitals, a couple of, actually one sports athletic recovery unit, and a chiropractic office actually. So there's been some movement there, but again, I think people are starting to see things climb in numbers, and people are looking for something. I mean, the So Clean is a really neat product. Bob, it's a great product. It is. I've been looking at it online. And just, again, it's all tools to help combat everything.
I think, Cruz, Scott, I'd want to see both. If I'm in a dentist office or I'm a patient, I'd want to know they've put the ionization in. I'd like to see a sticker up there saying, we've done this to our systems. And I think that you want it, right? And then I think, you got, Scott,
yeah, I had stickers made to put on buildings so that customers and clients, as they were walking into that establishment, would know that that they did something, and that they could see that the business owner is looking out for the people coming into their business.
Yep.
That's actually something I think that's an interesting marketing challenge is what businesses are doing. You know, are they putting up signage that indicates what kind of air filtration they have? And Dennis, are they putting up any signage that indicates how often they're testing their facility?
No, I haven't seen either of those in any of the facilities we've been in, which is odd.
It sounds like a good upsell you could offer.
Yes.
Yeah.
Signage.
Yeah, any business that we've installed the iWaves on, the iWave actually comes with a sticker inside of it that you put on the actual unit, and it says, this unit installed by, in our case, Granite State Plumbing and Heating, on this day and this time. And that way there, when a technician goes there, they know that it has an ionizer in it. And then we always give the customer a sticker that goes on their entrance door, whether they want to display it or not. That's up to them. It just gives the people a sense of, you know, they're actually looking out for the general public as they enter their establishment.
Okay. Have a question here from somebody in a small office space. You're looking for a recommendation for a small office space in a condo complex with several other businesses. The writer isn't even sure if there's a filtration system in there at all. What's a general thing that a small office need?
With the units that we're using, there's 3 units. There's the iWave C, which will treat a 12-ton unit and down. The iWave R, which will do a 6-ton unit. And then we actually have them to go in ductless splits. The units that hang on the wall or in the ceiling that do small offices. And they treat the air as the air gets pulled into the unit to be conditioned. And it just sends out the ions so they can start doing their job.
Okay, and speaking of ions, not surprisingly, we have a question about ionization units themselves, and I realize we didn't get into this. What is the unit like? How big is it? Is it part of the HVAC system, or is it freestanding? And what do they cost?
So this is the iWave C. I always have units with me, just like to show people. Come in a fancy box, and this is the larger unit.
Wow, that's not very big at all.
No, it's about 6 inches in diameter. You actually cut a 4-inch hole into either the ductwork or the unit itself. It comes with the wiring already made onto it. It's NEMA 4, so they can be mounted outdoors. The rain doesn't bother them. And this is the business end of it. So on this, you have 2 little whips that emit the ions. And every 24 hours, this little bar, if you can see it, will spin. And it knocks the dust off of the emitters. So that's why it's maintenance free. It just keeps those emitters free and clean. And like I said, it also has an hour meter on it. So it tells you how many hours it's running. So if they do fail, you'll have an indication of how long they lasted. Then there's the medium-sized unit, the iWave R, that would go into a 6-ton or smaller unit. It's basically the same thing, just a tiny bit smaller. It has the emitters on it. Same thing with the T-bar, so that it cleans the unit every so often. And then the one that everybody seems to enjoy and like is the one that goes on a ductless split. They're not very expensive to put in. It depends. The price range depends on how many you buy. As you buy more and more, we drop the price point to make it more efficient for the customer, because we can cut down on our labor at that point. But if anybody has questions on having their business looked at and priced out, they can definitely reach out to us, and we will touch base with them.
Is there, how many would, so I guess the number that you need is dependent on the size of your overall system. How do people think about that?
So if we've done businesses that have 25 rooftops. Each rooftop unit would get an ionizer. So each rooftop does its own space within the building. So whether it's doing the offices in the front of the building or the offices in the back of the building or a warehouse, each rooftop takes care of its own space, and then the ionizer would then treat that space.
And to build on that, Scott mentioned the tonnage of the unit. That's actually, it's not the weight of the unit, it's the heating and or cooling capacity of the unit. So if you have a unit that's larger, that serves a much larger space, you can put multiple ionizers in that same ductwork to accommodate the entire larger space. And going back to the question from before, the condo unit, they do have an HVAC system. If they have heat and air conditioning, it will have a unit that's outside feeding that space. It probably has a filter. It should have a filter, but any business that's leased or property that's leased will have an HVAC system that has filtration in it. It comes down to the frequency of maintenance and the operation of it.
Okay. Now,
one of the other things I forgot to mention that is pretty important when it comes to these units is the fact that from the factory, they can be wired at 24 volt, which is the same voltage that your thermostat essentially is wired at, 110 volts and 208 volts. Whereas your UV is on 208 or 460, costing you a lot of money in electricity. These guys don't use any power at all, and they can be wired together. So like John said, if you've got a 30-ton unit, you could put 4 of them in there. They wire them together, or we put them on their own transformer. Very effective, electricity-wise, very efficient. So that's why we settled on this unit, because it really is an effective and an efficient unit.
Now, I know you had said if you're interested in a price, reach out for a quote. We do have a number of questions here from folks who kind of want a ballpark of like what they're looking at for this. Is there anything that you can help them out?
So I'll just give a base price on them. The ionizer, which is the iWave C, we typically will do for, if it's a one-off, $1,500 a piece installed. The iWave R would be about $1,300 a piece installed, and the iWave M would be about $800 to $900 a piece installed.
Okay, awesome, thank you.
That's the ballpark. I mean, like I said, if a customer reached out to us and said we need 60 of them, then we would definitely sit down and talk about the price point and find out what we could actually do it for. Because sometimes you can get these in within an hour. Sometimes it takes 3 or 4 hours, depending on the structure of the unit and how you have to properly install them. That can all be a factor.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I think a number of people are appreciating that based on the questions that are coming in here. Another question that came in, I'm going to read it, but I don't 100% understand it, but it sounds interesting. So how's that for a prelude? Are there any studies to substantiate the use of BIPI and the efficiency of MERV 8 filters becoming as efficient as the MERV 11 filter? And I'm not seeing a lot of recognition there. I was wondering if there was some new technology shifting within those filters that might be worth pointing out. For the questioner, if you want to elaborate on that a little bit, feel free to type your elaboration into the question. I think we're a little stumped on this one.
Could you read it again? I was a bit distracted.
Oh, sure.
Sorry.
Are there any studies to substantiate the use of BIPI and the efficiency of MERV 8 filters becoming as efficient as MERV 11 filters?
Right, so
I
the
get
question is asking, is there a study asking about the bipolar ionization to show the effectiveness with the MERV 8 filter? And Scott, I think we have some of that data, is that correct? Is that on the
I
slides?
think so. I think it could be slide 5.
Okay, cool. So I spoke too soon. I should have known somebody on this panel would have known the answer. Emily, can you pull up slide 5 for us, please?
Okay, maybe that one's not it. I don't think we have that, John.
Did I not include that?
No.
Anecdotally, it's been out there for years that as a filter such as a MERV 8 gets loaded up with particulates, it automatically starts to be a more efficient filter because it's basically a dirty filter takes out more dust than a clean filter.
Right, it becomes sticky. As the filter, goes on with time, with dust sticking to it, it actually becomes a sticky surface, and it will capture more. We don't have a slide that shows that, but we do have data to back up the fact that it will make your MERV 8 filter more efficient. They say it will go up, its rating will actually boost to like a 10 or an 11 because it's making everything larger. It's making all your particles that it captures larger, heavier. The other thing that the ionization will do for you, it will actively kill bacteria in the condensate pans inside of all of your air handlers and rooftop units as well.
So we have a question from another question from the audience wondering if there's data on the effectiveness of ionization for COVID.
So we do have a slide for that. Emily, if you can go to slide 7.
7, yeah.
And Dennis, I think that was you had some information on that in what you showed as well, didn't you?
Yeah, well, in that test study we did at the 6 sites with 6 different test locations, there's pretty much a 50% reduction using the BIPI in the viable bacteria and fungi in the air. So that's not a lot of data. It's only 6 data points, but at least in this situation, it did reduce it, over 50%. So maybe if the units were redistributed or modified, you might get a little higher efficiency.
Okay, and you have some data here, Scott.
Yeah, so what this shows, an independent lab did a test out in California, and this is what they came up with. What they did was they used essentially they used a hood with a front door on it, a typical testing lab hood. They put active cells inside of a petri dish in it, all around the hood, not just in one spot. And this is the results that they came up with. The SARS, COVID, the iWave C is the top one. So within 30 minutes, the study showed that it had reduced the rate of reduction 99.4% in 30 minutes. Now, granted, yes, this was in a testing hood. There was air circulating through it like an air handler would have. And this is the reduction that they found. The bottom one is the iWave R, which is the unit that will do 6 tons and down, or they refer to it as the residential unit. And that one did it within 60 minutes at a 90% rate. There's been several other tests done. Ionization's been out since the 70s, and nowadays they do not make ozone. So for the cost point of these units, the installation rate of these units, the availability of these units, this is welcoming news to see a test result come out like this.
Okay, thank you. And switching gears a little bit, we have another question from the audience. Relative to your device, Bob, how long would we need to scrub a surface with the SoClean device disinfector? I'm thinking the cloth, in order to kill germs or COVID.
Yeah, so there's a independent lab test that we run. We don't go to independent lab tests, but there's a testing procedure on wipes and what you do. And so the first run we've got on hard surfaces is just a wipe straight off. What you're doing is you're leaving behind a residue, not a residue, but the aqueous ozone. So you can't really see it. It's water to what you're looking like, and then it dries up. And so by virtue of that, you're getting your kill. We've got more testing being done right now to get even higher rates of kill on other viruses and bacteria. As we get those, we'll post them up to the website. But the aqueous ozone and ozone, if you just do Google searches on those, there's tons of white papers out there about their effectiveness and how well they kill in different uses. We're just now taking that information to our device and getting the test results and put them out there.
Okay, cool. This may be a testing question again, Dennis. Are there types of ratings that restaurants could be certified to let patrons know that their airflow is doing a good job?
I'm going to say no, but I am not a food safety guy.
Okay, so nothing specific. Are there more general sort of like what are? I guess if you expanded that question to businesses in general, like how do you as a business tell your employees or your customers that your air system's doing a good job? Do you have something installed, then you have it tested? How often do you have it tested? That sort of thing. Like how do you, I guess, what's the standard there?
I'm not aware of a standard. I know that when we issue our reports, because typically it's by an employer or a building owner, the employees have a right to know what the results are. So we've always got a standard paragraph that in accordance with 29 CFR 1910-10-20, you need to share these results with the affected employees. Whether they do or not, if they had an employee complaint, then yes, they're going to take our report and give it to the employee. But we just put that in there as a CYA, but I'm not aware from a food safety standpoint there's anything out there.
Okay. Any others in terms of, I mean, that sort of goes back to the marketing question in some ways. Even if there's not a formal certification by a government body or by a standards organization, what are people doing to basically say, hey, we're doing a great job, we're testing on a regular basis, we've taken these mitigation actions to keep things clean?
New Hampshire used to have a state indoor air quality certification requirement. And every year, if you leased office space to the state, you had to have a CIH like myself go out, test the space for a variety of different parameters, and then we had to issue a certificate back to the building owner that then went to the state. The state lost funding for indoor air quality work from the EPA, so the standard, which came out probably 18 years ago, as sunset. The only place you see it being required is as if a builder, say Gilbane or somebody builds a new office building for the state, in the contract they have to do indoor air quality certification to make sure that the HVAC systems are running properly. And they didn't install something, say, high in formaldehyde or high VOC emitter, because those will get kicked out if they're too high in the air quality. Then we can't certify the space. But other than that, there's not a lot out there.
Okay. Well, we have hit the top of the hour, and man, that went by fast. I really appreciate you guys sharing your expertise with us and across sort of a number of overlapping disciplines. This was really great, and I also thank our audience for joining us and for being so engaged with this. A great number of questions and a great number of folks on the webinar. Again, our sponsors and presenters today, RPF Environmental, Granite State Plumbing and Heating, and SoClean. Thank you all, and stay well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ernesto.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.